How's it going, everybody? It's 5:30. Tried to record this yesterday, but ran out of space on the phone, so we're shooting on Tuesday. And it is time for this week's edition of Riding in Cars with Cards. And it's our first repeat offender, if you will. Early on, we're still early on, but one of the first episodes I did was on a deck concept for Blue Black Pteramander. And while the deck was good at the time, it was it's one that just over time since it debuted, it got a little bit of attention from people like Mason Clark, and Jim Davis played it on stream, and the deck seemed good, which is why I got interested. And then I saw literal zero about it, except for an updated list from its creator once. So I picked up all the stuff and I started tinkering and I started playing it, and I started doing some refining, and in the process I ended up doing some darling killing, and I ended up doing some reevaluation of what the deck was and what it was good at, what it was bad at, and kind of arrived at a list that is very much still in the spirit of the original concept, but is pretty different in terms of execution. So what this deck is at its core is a tap-out control deck. It is a board control deck, at least in game one. The idea is that if you are really good at dominating the board, you will have a reasonable chance against most of the aggro and mid-range opponents you will face. So unless something in the control/combo sphere dominates the format to an unhealthy amount, you will be slightly favored in a majority of your matchups. That's not to say you're going to be like 70-30 or 80-20 in those matchups, but because of the amount of removal you're playing and because of the ability to just interact on the axis of keeping the board relatively clear, you're going to be real good against creatures. You're really good at killing creatures. That is your MO. And then because of your ability to win those creature matchups in the pre-boarded games, there's like 4 cards in the sideboard that help improve specific creature matchups, and then the entire rest of your sideboard is for things your main deck is bad against. So I thought it would be useful to start things off at the beginning, the meat, if you will, of where the concept comes from. And that is the threats that you're using to close out the game once you start to pull ahead. Because remember, we're a tap-out control deck. That means we keep the board clear for a few turns and then we just drop a big stupid thing. Well, unlike previous iterations of tap-out control, where your big stupid thing was like a 6 or 7 mana creature that your opponent just couldn't do anything about, or was a card like Approach of the Second Sun, this deck's a little different. Instead of playing along that axis, we're playing Pteramander at 4 copies and 2 copies of Embodiment of Agonies as basically Pteramander 5 and 6. So the advantage you gain from playing these creatures as your kill conditions over something like, Red Splash for Nicol Bolas, or, White Splash for Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, or any of the other potential splash options, green for Hydroid Krasis, whatever it is that's going to be suggested to me. The biggest advantage you gain in every matchup where you pull a little bit ahead and you start to jam your threats on the table, those cards are admittedly more powerful. They are more powerful Magic the Gathering cards. But what they lack, what Pteramander and Embodiment of Agonies lack in raw power, they make up for in raw efficiency. In this deck, Pteramander is a 2 to 3 mana 5/5 with flying. And Embodiment of Agonies is usually a 3-mana 4/4 to 5/5 flying with Death Touch. That's why we're playing them. They are cheap and massive, which allows us to double spell earlier in the game. It allows us to have to play control, like keep the board completely clear for a much shorter period of time. It allows us to control the board while casting card selection spells to dig through the deck. The mana efficiency is the biggest advantage to this deck over other control decks, because we're not playing outside of our other threat at 4 mana and 2 of the cards that were put in the deck specifically to interact with him. Every card and one particular haymaker of removal spell. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the main deck. 8 if you count the board. 8 total cards in the 75. Everything else costs 3 or less. That is difficult for a lot of decks to keep pace with. Speaking of other threats, our other threat is God Eternal Kefnet, which might be one of the most powerful creatures I've played with in a while. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic when I say that, and I know it comes out that way. But I'm not trying to be hyperbolic when I say that. The card is just stone cold nuts. Absolutely insane. 4/5. So lives through requisite removal spell tests. It lives through Lightning Strike. Lives through Cry of the Carnarium. Lives through Reckless Rage. Lives through, a lot of stuff. It's legendary, so it lives through Cast Down. Costs more than 3, so it lives through Tyrant Scorn. Has the removal protection against cards like Despark and Ixalan's Binding. The interaction against Ixalan's Binding is particularly hilarious because they exile it and you just tuck it, and now you can still cast them. So, there's a lot to love about Kefnet here. To say nothing of the sheer obscene amount of card advantage you get from untapping with Kefnet once or twice. The card is just bananas, obscene, really good. Play it. Try it out if you haven't. It's specifically very bad against Teferi Time Raveler and can be a little slow in some matchups. Like your Simic Nexus matchup, you don't want Kefnet so much. Except, actually, I don't think your Nexus matchup is so bad that you can't play it, because flipping a Duress off of a Kefnet or flipping a Thought Erasure off a Kefnet is really good there. Unless they have Tameo, I guess. But I digress. Their card is just really, 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 really powerful. And then our other creatures kind of bring us into our next category, which is card selection. We're playing 3 copies of Augur Bolus. And I waffled for a while over what I wanted to do with the last creature slot. There was consideration given to a lot of different things. But Augur has been one of the more consistently performing cards. It's a very unassuming 2-drop. Opponents don't want to waste removal spells on it, and it can just chunk in for a little bit of damage against control and combo. Dealing 4 or 5 damage with an Augur is a very real thing that happens. And then, sometimes when the wind is right, your opponent does use a removal spell, or they do counter an Augur because they think you don't have any other action, and then you get to jam one of your actual win conditions down their throat. It's just so good. And the fact that we're playing outside of the creatures that I've mentioned, we're not playing any more of them. So it's those creatures. So 4 Pteramander, 2 Embodiment, 2 Kefnet, 3 Augur, for a grand sum total of 11 creatures. We have plenty of instants and sorceries to hit. We're only playing 23 lands. There's a couple of reasons I'll get to in a minute. But Augur is just kind of an all-star here. It hits far more often than it whiffs, with 11 creatures and only 23 lands. If I could find a way to drop the land count lower to play more spells, I would. And it's possible that, you know, some of my numbers change in time to allow me to do just that. And to power up the Pteramander and the Embodiment. A special note on Embodiment of Agonies, I didn't actually have to make any deck building concessions to it. I didn't have to play a bunch of weird stuff just to make it work, unlike something like a Hero Precinct 1. I'm already playing cards that are different mana costs at the same point in the converted mana cost. Like we have blue-black, 1 and a black, 1 and a blue at 2 mana. We have a black and a blue at 1 mana. And then, you know, at 3 mana, we have the Embodiment itself, black, black 1. At 4 mana, we have Kefnet at blue, blue 2. We have one of our other cards at 3 and a blue. And then we have, you know, our Haymaker at blue, blue, black 2, which is kind of a spoiler, but, you know, enjoy. So I didn't really have to make a lot of concessions to make Embodiment of Agonies a just really, really good Magic card. That was really exciting for me to be able to play something like that without having to build around it. I just get to play a big, stupid creature for 3 mana. So moving from creatures into our smorgasbord of spells, copyright 2019, we're playing, on top of Augur Bolus, we're playing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 additional card selection effects. And important to note, I said card selection, not card draw. It's very important to know. Because a deck like this will lose if it draws the wrong cards. And the card draw spells in Standard do not offer a large array of selection for a deck like this. You don't want to spend 4 mana to cast a Chemister's Insight a lot in this deck, because you want to be able to cast it and then have something else to leave up to interact. You know, you don't have something like a Teferi Time Raveler on turn 3 to create a scenario where your opponent time walks themselves. Like, you don't have a lot of time walks outside of the removal spells that you're playing. So it's important to make sure we draw the right card for the right job. And that's where these card effects come in. Opt is basically so we can trim from 25 lands down to 23, if we're being honest. Between Opt and the other card selection effects, that's what allowed us to get down to 23 lands. And Opt, like, it really should need no introduction at this point. It's been in Standard for over a year. It's really, really good at what it does. It's the perfect level of 1 mana cantrip for Standard. I firmly believe that. Opt is the perfect 1 mana cantrip for Standard. It's not too powerful like a Preordain or a Ponder or a Serum Visions or a Fateless Looting or a Sleight of Hand, but it's also not weak like, you know, Peak or, you know, something of that nature. Something that you're just really kind of embarrassed to jam into your deck. Scry 1, Draw 1 is just powerful enough, and the fact that it's an instant lets it play really well with Kefnet, because you can cast Opt on your opponent's turn, reveal an instant or sorcery, and cast it. Even if it's a sorcery, you can cast the copy for a 2 mana reduction. So it's another powerful little interaction here. Our other card selection effects, and this is where I'm going to take the most flack, and I understand and respect that. You are more than allowed to say that I'm wrong about this and insist on playing cards that have a little bit more of a pedigree. But the cards I'm playing in that other card selection slot at 2 mana are 3 copies of Shimmer of Possibility and 2 copies of Anticipate. Why Shimmer? Well, it digs 4 cards deep, and you get the one you want. For 2 mana, You dig 4 cards deep and get the one you want. It's like an Azcanta activation, except it only costs 2 mana instead of 4, and you can take anything, not just a non-creature, non-land. That's really good. That's really, really good. Anticipate is because I wanted some more instants in the deck. I wanted another card that would allow me to double spell at 4 mana during my opponent's turn. I could be able to represent a myriad of things at 4 mana between one of our other card selection effects, an array of removal spells, and the Anticipate itself or Opt. There's a lot of things I could be representing at 4 mana. Options is the name of the game, and Opt can't give me all the options by itself. Hashtag MTG dad jokes. But Anticipate has kind of proven its worth to me over time. It's a card I used to play in Grixis Control during Hour of Devastation Standard to help smooth over draws, hit land drops, or avoid the mana flood later in the game. Like, it's a better top deck than Opt when hands are running low and the boards are clear, because it can just find you more action. It digs that extra 2 cards deep before giving you the one you want. And not for nothing, but between Opt, Shimmer Possibility, and Anticipate, and then Augur, and then one of our 2 4-mana card selection effects, all of them function under Narset in some capacity. Like, you can cast Opt on your opponent's turn to avoid Narset, and then all of the other cards will add cards to your hand instead of the alternative of drawing them and getting locked out by Narset. So that's not nothing either. As for our other 2 effects, we're playing 1 copy of Drawn from Dreams and 1 copy of Chemister's Insight. Drawn from Dreams is the most powerful card I have flipped off of a Kefnet, at least when it comes to card selection. One of our others is the most powerful card. But when it comes to card selection, there's nothing more powerful than flipping Drawn from Dreams. Because when you flip Drawn from Dreams with a Kefnet, it is literally Dig Through Time. You are casting Dig Through Time in Standard again. That's really good. Dig 7 cards deep, get the 2 you want, put the rest on the bottom. That's strong. Chemister's Insight was done for a couple of reasons. One, another instant at 4 mana. If we're leaving up double removal spell, we can also be leaving up Chemisters to draw some cards, similar to what the other control decks do. You get to represent a lot of things at 4 mana. The interaction with Kefnet is still really powerful because you can flip it up and for 2 mana draw 2 cards. You get Chart a Course without having to play Chart a Course. And it draws cards on your opponent's turn, so the first one, if it's a good one, can flip up for Kefnet and give you a spell to cast. Really powerful. And that brings us to our limited suite of Disruption in the main deck, which is 3, yes, 3, another decision you can feel free to eviscerate me for, but 3 copies of Thought Erasure. And I waffled on this a bunch, but ultimately the 4th Thought Erasure was the casualty that made room for Embodiment of Agonies. Because there are several scenarios where the card is just actively not good in the mid-game. Namely, if you're playing against Nexus or Bant Ramp or, the Mass Manipulation deck or anything that's playing Tamiyo, it's the worst top deck by a pretty substantial margin. It's really embarrassing to top deck that against Tamiyo. It's also very possible that your opponents run out of cards because of your affinity for removing creatures. So, as powerful as Thought Erasure is, and we are going to play the 4th in the board, it's not a card I felt comfortable starting 4 of for now. Look at their hand, take a non-land card from it, surveil 1. I don't need to explain why that card's good. It just is. And then we move into our removal spells, and we've got a bunch. So it's best to categorize our removal spells by what they're here for. So against fast creature decks like vampires, like mono red, like mono white, like the Boros decks, like the Mardu aggro that's playing stuff like Hero and Heroic Reinforcements, we have 2 copies of Disfigure and 2 copies of Cry of the Carnarium. One is a 1 mana target creature gets -2/-2. The other is a 3 mana all creatures get -2/-2. Important to note here that unless you have an unadapted Pteramander on the board, you are very rarely killing your own creatures with Cry of the Carnarium. And when you are, it is because you have to survive. In addition to that, we're playing 2 copies each of Cast Down and Tyrant Scorn. I went with a split. I went with 2-2 split here instead of the original 3-1 in favor of Cast Down for a couple of reasons. One, Tyrant Scorn has more text in matchups where removal spells aren't as good, because I can use it to save my threat from an opponent's removal spell. It's not the most important thing about the card. Obviously, the important part of the card is it's a 2-drop removal spell that is less conditional than some of the other things we could be playing. But the fact that, it has text in matchups where it's not good otherwise, where just destroy target creature with converted cost 3 or less would be bad. Like, I understand. It's so good. Bouncing my Pteramander in response to your removal spell, only to recast it and adapt it. Like, bouncing my embodiment with it, and then it being another different mana cost in the graveyard in order to make the embodiment bigger. Bouncing my Kefnet rather than having it talked. Bouncing your big stupid thing, like the fact that it still scales against big creatures. Still good. So, it's good. It's just really, really good. And then we are playing... What is it? We're playing 3 copies, and this is our haymaker of Enter the God Eternals. And this was the card that got me the most excited to play this deck, because it's like an extra threat. It's like, the best way I can describe this card is it's like a Flame Tongue Kavu on every kind of steroid you can imagine. So, Flame Tongue Kavu, for the uninitiated, was a 4 mana, 4 power creature that dealt 4 damage to a creature. Well, this is that, but it's 5 mana. But you gain 4 life, mill 4, and you can find it off of your card selection effects. Like, you can find it off an Augur. You can reveal it with Kefnet to get to cast it for 3 mana. That is ridiculous. And then our sideboard is where things get interesting. So, we're playing 2 copies of Ritual of Soot. We're playing... those are to replace Cry of the Carnarium in matchups where Cry of the Carnarium is not good. We're playing, what is it? We're playing 1 copy each of Cast Down and Tyrant Scorn to kind of round out our numbers. Make sure we can board in the appropriate piece when we need it. We want the extra Tyrant Scorn over the extra Cast Down against decks like Feather, where there's more legendary creatures. And, the ability to bounce an Aurelia or bounce a Lyra after they sideboard into kind of Boros Angels is relevant, so that we can keep getting in and make the game into a race that we can win. That's a matchup where maybe Enter the God Eternals is less good too, so even having just an extra Cast Down is fine. And then that's all the creature technology in the board. Outside of that, we are heavy on our anti-control elements. Most notably, we don't have any main deck outs to Planeswalkers other than attacking them to death. It's important to note that. I mean, it's a weakness that was inherent in the deck. The original list was playing Vraska's Contempt, but I was feeling a little bit clogged at 4 mana, and it was a card I didn't feel comfortable investing in with rotation pending and the format shifting. So if you feel like you can cut something else to play Vraska's Contempt, by all means do it. Cut the Drawn from Dreams to play 1, play the second one on the board over something else. I can understand that. But our anti-planeswalker tech, we're just going straight for the source. We're getting Elder Spells. We're playing 2 of them. Just get all of them out of here. 2 mana, go. Get out of here. And then we're playing 2 copies of Negate, 3 copies of Duress. So that gives us 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. What else are we playing? I'm trying to remember. There's another one of the 4th Thought Erasure. And then 3 copies, as the last 3 cards on the sideboard, 3 copies of Thief of Sanity. And there's some good reasons why. It's a better creature against control. Because if it sticks, none of your creatures get all their value up front. So, like, all of your creatures are somewhat bad against Teferi. But the fact that all of them cost, except Kefnet, cost 3 mana or less, mitigates the tempo loss somewhat because redeploying them doesn't cost you an entire turn. Thief of Sanity falls into that category. Like, you don't just jam it out on turn 3 and hope for the best. You want to create a situation where you can play it and protect it, or play it and leave up interaction. And especially after you sideboard, like, Negate, Duress to rip the Teferis out of their hand to supplement all 4 Thought Erasures. Like, you can hang, you can do stuff. And then Thief just takes over a game by itself. You get to play your deck and your opponent's deck at the same time. So, I've been enjoying this deck a ton. If once I get the video uploaded and the post shared, I will do a comment below with the actual deck list, like in text form, so that you can look it up. You can find prices. You can price everything out. Important to note, we're not playing any like crazy utility lands because the colors are kind of intensive. You want to be able to leave up cards that cost just 1 colored mana. So I didn't feel comfortable playing a land like Blast Zone. It was in my initial list, but it ended up not making the cut in the long run. And then we're playing, 23 lands. So all 4, 4 each of Watery Grave, Drowned Catacomb, and then I think we're 8-7 in favor of islands. I think we're 8 islands, 7 swamp. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at this show. Like, if you feel more comfortable playing Charter Course and then Vraska's Contempt, by all means, do it. The advantage that this deck brings, again, is the mana. It's got clean, easy mana because it stays in 2 colors. It does it like, you don't end up shocking yourself a ton. You don't end up you don't get locked out of the game by the random person that shows up with a bunch of Assassin's Trophies and Field of Ruins. And because of that fact, we get to play a much more mana efficient game too. So, and when I say 2, I mean also. But you can also play a more efficient game too if you're going up against a control deck, because you get to board out stuff like Enter for stuff like Duress that just kind of buries them. So, which is funny that I say buries them because that's the old school term for destroy, which is what we do a lot against creatures. So, all the dad jokes today. But that's going to wrap up the tech for Blue-Black Pteramander. This is the list that I'm playing right now. So bear that in mind. This is my exact 75 that I've been playing. And it has been an absolute beating against decks like Vampires, Mono Red, Mono White, like the tokens decks. And then at work even, I've been playing it against my own rebuild of the Lucas Faley Gruul and my own Simic Flash against Is It Phoenix, and the deck just continues to astound. Like, I do not suffer from not having fun playing this deck. It is such a good time. So I can't recommend it enough. But that's going to wrap it up this week. Thanks for watching. If you got questions, comments, concerns, leave them down here, and I'll catch you next week.